The story isn't about property lines or legal documents. It's about what happens when you spend 18 months defending a country, only to come home and find your own dirt has been stolen right out from under you. They built 83 luxury townhomes on the 5 acres my grandfather left me. And the only reason they stopped smiling was when they saw the name of my company printed in vinyl on the side of my Ford F-350, Apex Recovery and Salvage. I specialize in precision demolition, and suddenly, they realized they weren't dealing with some passive landowner. They were dealing with the exact person who could turn their whole neighborhood into a very expensive pile of dust. I got back late that Tuesday night, you know, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones after 2 flights and a red-eye from overseas deployment. The next morning, I drove out to what should have been the Silver Maple lot, the beautiful stretch of land my grandfather called his legacy. But it wasn't beautiful anymore. It was gone, replaced by this monstrosity. Rows and rows of identical, stucco and glass townhomes maybe 3 stories high, all shimmering in the morning sun under a sign that read, "Welcome to Canyon Creek Residences." My stomach dropped right out of me. I actually thought I was in the wrong county, but no. The old oak at the property line, the one with the carved initials, was still there, just buried behind a freshly laid curb. I parked my truck, and I remember my hands shaking as I reached for the old deed I carried in my console. Before I could even step onto the asphalt, a guy in a cheap vest, security apparently, was jogging over, already reaching for his radio. I told him straight up, "You need to get your supervisor because all of this, every single one of these buildings, is sitting on my private property." That's when the black Audi SUV rolled up, silent and sleek, and out steps Vivian Thorne. Everything about her was surgically precise. The power suit, the hair pulled so tight you wondered if she could actually blink, the smile that just did not reach her eyes. She was the president of the Canyon Creek HOA, and she was already extending a hand to me, which I definitely didn't take. She called me Mr. Hayes, said there must be some sort of confusion, and offered to take me inside the community center. Confusion? I showed her photos on my phone. Photos of nothing but grass and the old oak, dated the week I shipped out. When she slid the stack of zoning approvals and purchase contracts across her mahogany desk, claiming everything was in order, I already knew what I was looking for. And there it was, right at the bottom of the land transfer agreement, a clumsy, looping signature. My signature, or at least a terrible criminal forgery of it. I told her flat out, "This isn't mine. I was literally serving in a combat zone when you claim I signed this." That's when she pulled the classic villain move, the appeal to emotion. "Mr. Hayes, be reasonable. 83 families live here now, children, elderly. What do you expect us to do?" But then the silence hit, and it wasn't from my answer. It was because my phone buzzed, and the screen lit up with a text from my partner. "Welcome back, boss. Apex just landed the waterfront contract. Ready for your sign-off." Vivian's gaze flicked down from my face to the illuminated screen, and then she noticed the small, faded logo on my phone case. And then she looked at my truck parked glaringly outside the window. Apex Recovery and Salvage. Her face went from that plastic professional white to a sickly pale green. Her voice cracked when she asked, You run a demolition company?" I just stood up, smiled the first real smile since I got back, and said, "Yes, Vivian, I do. And I suggest you spend the rest of the day figuring out how to explain to your board why you built a very nice, very large neighborhood on stolen ground." The meeting was over. The fight was instant and dirty. I called my old army buddy, Sam, who'd gone the legal route after his tour, and he was livid. He confirmed what I suspected. Not only was this clear-cut fraud, but because I was on active duty. It fell under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, meaning the penalties were going to be severe, federal severe. Sam filed an emergency injunction the next day. But the Thorns were already maneuvering. Victor Thorne, Vivian's husband and the real brains of this operation, was a major developer. He basically owned the local government. He orchestrated a PR nightmare. They called a mandatory community meeting that night, and when Sam and I walked in, the place was packed, simmering with fear and rage. Vivian stood at the podium, pointing right at me. practically wailing about the demolition man who wanted to make their families homeless over a simple property dispute. That's where I met Brenda. She was the most vocal resident, a neighborhood queen, eyes narrowed with absolute hatred. She demanded to know why, if I owned the land, I waited until families moved in. Before I could even explain my deployment, Victor stepped in, smooth as oil, lying that I had approved the sale, but was only trying to extort more money now that the property was valuable. I managed to tell my truth, pointing out the forgery in my military service. But truth sometimes drowns in noise. The tension broke only when Maya Cruz, a sharp-eyed reporter from the Westwood Gazette, slipped in. When Vivian tried to kick her out, Maya cited the open meeting law, flashing this quick, defiant smile that told me she was hungry for a bigger story. The next day, Richard tried the intimidation route, offering me a cool $1.2 million in cash, right there in front of Sam, to forget the forgery allegations. When I refused, one of his hired thugs threatened my equipment. That just lit a fire under Sam, and he was quick to threaten an additional charge of witness intimidation. It was a joke, but they were desperate. But the real gut punch wasn't the thorns. It happened right after Judge Martinez granted my temporary injunction, blocking all future construction. Maya and I were huddled in a small room, celebrating the small win, when she pulled up this grainy security footage from the County Hall Records Office. It showed Victor Thorne and a bribed security guard swapping out my original property deed for the forged one, the night before he filed his permits. It was the smoking gun, but I was distracted. Something about the signature on the forged document. It was too neat, too specific in its flaws. I was staring at an old photo of me and my ex-wife, Sarah, standing on the Silver Maple lot just before the divorce. Sarah, who had worked as a legal assistant, who knew my signature better than I did, and who was furious that my grandfather had left the land solely to me. I asked Maya to run a quick search. 2 days later, we met at her office. She didn't have to say a word. She just slid the bank records across the table. 4 deposits of $25,000 from Thorne Development into Sarah's account. Starting the month I deployed, $100,000 for the keys to my grandfather's legacy. It felt like being hit by a train I never saw coming. Not only had she betrayed me, but she'd worked with the people who were trying to destroy my life. The FBI was already tracking the Thornes when we brought Sarah's evidence to them. Agent Torres was methodical. When Sarah finally sat down in Sam's office, looking fragile and terrified, she admitted everything. The anger over the divorce, the money, giving them access to the old property box. But the final straw for her, the reason she flipped, was hearing Victor and Vivian plotting to take care of me permanently if I didn't stop fighting. That made it real for her. Just as Sarah was signing her formal statement, Maya's phone blew up. Victor had just called an emergency meeting, telling the terrified residents they each had to pay $50,000 immediately for a legal defense fund, or they would lose their homes. He was literally milking them for one last payday before he bolted. We raced to Canyon Creek. The community center was pure chaos. Victor and Vivian were standing at the front, stuffing checks into a cardboard box. I walked right into the middle of it. "Stop!" I yelled, and the whole room went silent. I told them the truth, that the FBI was investigating the Thornes for fraud against a military service member, and they were stealing from them one last time. Victor completely lost it. Lunging toward the exit, box of money clutched to his chest. And here's the unbelievable part. Brenda, the woman who had screamed about the demolition man just days earlier, stood right in his path and blocked the door. "Give us back our money!" she screamed. It was a cinematic moment. 2 men grabbed Victor. The box of checks scattered everywhere, and then the sirens arrived. Agent Torres walked in, badge out, and arrested both Victor and Vivian Thorne for fraud and conspiracy. As they led them away in handcuffs, Victor snarled at me, "This isn't over, Hayes." "I have friends." Agent Torres just smiled and replied, "Not for long, sir. We're investigating them next." But the victory felt hollow. I was the legal owner. The Thornes were gone, but the consequence was that all 83 families, the innocent ones, were now facing eviction. Victor had pulled one last dirty trick, using his corrupt judge to issue an order claiming structural issues, that required immediate evacuation. The next morning, the townhomes were empty. The news vans were clustered on the road, waiting for the story they all expected. The demolition man was finally going to bulldoze the stolen neighborhood, and maybe part of me wanted to. Sam and Maya were there, watching me. Brenda screeched up in her minivan, jumped out and started screaming at me again, pointing out that her 8-month pregnant daughter was sleeping on a couch. The fury was understandable. I just held up a stack of documents and told her very calmly, "Brenda, I need you to listen. I need you to get these papers to every single family, and I need everyone back here by noon." She looked at the papers, confused, and Sam couldn't help but grin. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "Mike isn't demolishing the homes. He's selling them to the current residents at half the market price, with an extra discount for veterans." I looked at Brenda, whose face was cycling through shock, confusion, and then utter relief. I explained that helping 83 families keep their homes honored my grandfather's memory better than tearing everything down. I was keeping the empty acreage, not to build a mansion, but to create a resident-owned community garden and a playground. The cameras started rolling again as the residents returned, tears in their eyes. I told the media, "Today, we're not just building a community, we're rebuilding trust. These families did nothing wrong. The new Canyon Creek residences will be owned by the people who live here, not the developers who tried to profit from fraud." Later that evening, as the sun set over the newly resident-owned homes, Maya and I walked the property line. She said I gave up a fortune, and she was right. But I gained something better. I watched Sarah, my ex-wife, standing with Brenda, helping organize volunteers for the new HOA board. She was trying to make things right. I looked at the houses, lights flickering on, neighbors talking on their porches. It almost tore us apart. But the land ended up bringing us together. I was the demolition man, but my greatest work wasn't in tearing things down. It was in building a foundation for justice. Now that's my story. It's messy, it's personal. And honestly, the legal battle for the Thorns' corrupt friends is just beginning. But it makes you think, doesn't it? When justice finally comes, does it have to mean destruction? If you were in my shoes, would you have taken the $1.2 million and walked away? Or would you have done what I did and risked everything to build a better community? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served.